They wouldn't release my record of this as a single. So I actually went into the studio and put a work track down for the guys on this one.
Okay.
I was a highwayman.
Oh, yeah.
Along the coach roads I did ride, with sword and pistol by my side. Many a young maid lost her baubles to my trade. Many a soldier shed his lifeblood on the blade. Jimmy Webb. They finally hung me in the spring of 25, but I am still alive.
Whatever happened to the cosmic cowboy? There was a funky beginning in his groovy end. The cowboy is quintessential Americana, real, romantic, or revisionist. American civilization has that cowboy in its mythos and cultural DNA. The legend is the cowboy waltzed into the emptiness of the western frontier. That's not exactly the truth, but the United States has the cowboy as a useful image. An analysis of anything American must grapple with the cowboy. The singing cowboy is a folkloric descendant of the European hanged fiddler by way of the Scotch-Irish immigrants to Appalachia, but all that complexity has been Americanized. The cowboy has his poetic immortality. That hard fightin', hard drinkin', hard sounding has been left in the inheritance of country and Western music. Country music is one polarizing music genre. It's due to being a particularly confrontational style.
The 70th album is called Closing In on the Fire, and we are pleased to welcome Waylon Jennings to CBS. And then Brian would take a shot of Waylon, who'd be sitting right here in the chair opposite me, but as you can see, there is nobody in the chair. We have no idea where he went to. No, I swear to God.
Country likes to ground itself in drinkin', fightin', history, and politics. American country music, stereotypically, lands right on the political scale, if it is a scale, but due to a heavy gospel heritage and influence, country is also transcendental. Any form of country can be literate and introspective. There's plenty of literate and introspective rednecks, cedar choppers, hippies, and cosmic cowboys. In the sonic lineage, country inherited the ballad song format of ancient bards and troubadours. It's a new world, not even exclusively United States, version though. The 1,000 American threads of the Highwayman prove that in its storied nature. It's a song and also a group. Highwayman is the song by storied and himself singer-songwriter Jimmy Webb. The Highwaymen is the group which took their name from Webb's song. It was for its thematic significance since the group did not need any advantage from Webb's reputation. The Man in Black Johnny Cash, the iconic Outlaws Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, along with the scholar-turned-rogue songwriter Chris Christopherson. The Highwaymen were the most impressive country supergroup, if not musical supergroup in general, ever assembled. Their parts were from inside and outside the 1980s country music establishment. The lightning strike event that brought about the Highwaymen shone country music's talent for cross-pollination of ideas. What do these elder statesmen of country have to do with the cosmic cowboy, though, and the song by Jimmy Webb? Well, one song can do a lot. The origins of cosmic cowboy are as a term for an unofficial Texas country music movement in the 1970s. Nothing was spared from the cultural confrontations of the 1960s and 1970s in the United States, not even stereotypically conservative country music. Until the 1970s, outside folklore studies, country western was often demeaned as hillbilly music for rednecks, something it often played into at the time. Despite that, the divide in country was due to musical stylings rather than culture comp of the 1960s and 1970s. Salt-of-the-earth classic cowboy country collided with Austin's progressive country in the 1970s. In contrast to the decades-old country music establishment in Nashville, a la the Grand Ole Opry, the 1970s music scene in Austin would bill itself as a place of progressive country, taking a keynote from parallel progressive rock of the time. It was a free frontier for musical experimentation. Austin, Texas was the sonic frontier of the later coined cosmic cowboy. It gave rising country, folk, and singer-songwriter musicians a place to rise up outside the stage cowboy setting of Nashville, which some called regressive. It was a place many had come to see as old hat and stagnant in its archaic 1940s-based musical management. So where to go beyond the country music establishment in Nashville? Austin, of course. What was progressive country, though? It is not a useful label on its own. In Cosmic Cowboys, Thunderbirds, and Punks, Jonathan Watson described the mixture which produced progressive country as a unique, regionally based amalgamation of honky-tonk, folk, rock and roll, western swing, boogie-woogie, and other styles heard out of a variety of venues throughout the capital city. It was a powerful, potent base for experimentation and country sound. The Lone Star State was seen as the ideal kickback. The long-haired cowboy was at peace on the range. The more radical political elements of progressive country, though this was not the entire movement, were left at ease in Austin. A cowboy with long hair was allowed the liberty simply because he was a cowboy. It was unique, unspoken social understanding Jason D. Mellor describes as hippie redneck populism. While suspicious of established norms and institutions, as was the 1970s, the radicals had to make peace with the conservative majority in Texas. Marijuana was still a no-go issue, but this entire confluence would later be embodied in the easygoing outlaw, Willie Nelson, grand champion of the Austin music scene by 1974. One must not underrate the uniqueness of Austin's stable, if somewhat stifled, social environment in hippie redneck populism. It was due both to cowboy realism and failed idealism. By the mid-1970s, Austin was at its cultural peak. It was attracting bohemians, washouts, and firebrands from counterculture centers like New York and LA, bringing in their own West or East Coast beatnik cultural strains. No radical was able to unseat Austin's pseudo-stability, though. Remarkable because Austin existed against the 1967 Pentagon March, not even 10 years earlier, where parallel elements of the crazy counterculture and straight-laced American institutions clashed in anti-Vietnam War protest. The plan was to levitate the Pentagon with prayers and chants. It was a scheme for a wider anti-war publicity push, though. This photo, which has probably been bashed into your brain, flower power, comes from it. The marchers and cowboys were under many of the same influences, but produced far different cultural results. Hippie disillusionment by the 1970s as flower power turned to hard drugs and murderous rock and roll. A new identity melds opposite elements. How did the hippie collide with the cowboy? The Zen, all-American cosmic cowboy. The cosmic cowboy archetype was pure American cultural synthesis. The down-home cowboy of classic country and folk, who was the icon of the idyllic Texas landscape. Then the dope-smoking intellectual hippie in urban bohemia with all that musical craziness. The two positions were rectified, at the time, by a shared belief in local Austin. Common introspection, self-referential lyrics, and common grounds in political beliefs of natural conservation or anti-industrialism. Crossover was inevitable. Cultural conflict was not unheard of across Texas. Ray Willie Hubbard wrote the song Up Against the Wall, Redneck Mother about a tense confrontation in a Dallas redneck bar, when a group of barflies had threatened Hubbard for his long hair during a beer run. The song's name itself was likely a reference to one of the more surreal radical elements of the 1960s, New York-based Dadaist anarchist group Up Against the Wall Motherfucker. It was country music great Michael Martin Murphey who popularized Cosmic Cowboy from within. His song, Cosmic Cowboy Part 1, off his 1973 album, Cosmic Cowboy Souvenir. Murphy, though, maintains the song is semi-satirical. A lyrical parody of the naive newcomers to Austin looking to ride the coattails of the cultural wellspring. It was a warning as well, as, after 1973, Murphy would abandon Austin for Colorado. He felt the mainstream was moving in to cash in on Austin. The term Cosmic Cowboy stuck, though, with outsiders looking in, mainly the music press. Individuals like Graham Parsons, who existed earlier, became iconic figures of that style. It was a catch-all for the Texas movement of progressive country. Murphy's own career displayed that ability for country to be a creative crucible. Murphy has described the ultimate root of his own, in American, music as the ballad. Not in a romantic sense, but in the older literary sense. His cosmic elements come from the urban 1960s counterculture and their beatnik postmodern authors. The term cosmic, akin to groovy, comes from the distant influence of Eastern mysticism by the way of the era's drug culture. Cowboy obviously comes from Texas and the material of the classic ballad and country music. Murphy has also credited Leonard Cohen as an influence in his songwriting, though. He says this is another Eastern influence from Chinese poetry due to the influence of the Imagist poets on Cohen through modernist authors like Ezra Pound. Like the Imagists, progressive country finds its strength in emphasized, standalone images that are often unexplained. On the Austin scene that produced the progressive country sound, Murphy described it as such. The music really did come out of a very funky kind of alley bohemian scene. I compare it to Paris in the 1930s. It was a very bohemian, live on wine and cheese kind of life. Songwriter Jimmy Webb took up many of progressive country's lessons and more existential features. Webb, like Murphy, had got his start as a songwriter in Hollywood. Webb got his early fame from writing a string of country hits like By the Time I Get to Phoenix, Wichita Lineman, and Galveston, the last two being hits for country superstar Glen Campbell. It would solidify a solid relationship between Webb and Campbell. Webb had, after all, written the iconic Wichita Lineman for Campbell in a few hours on a green piano.
When Glen recorded Jimmy's Wichita Lineman, they finally met, the all-American singing star and the genius hippie songwriter.
And I went down to the studio and met Mr. Campbell for the first time, and I walked in and I was probably starting my beard then, and I had hair down in my shoulders like yours, and probably I was wearing a yak vest and a tie-dyed t-shirt. And I walked in and Glenn looked at me. The very first thing he ever said to me, he says, "Don't you think it's time you got a haircut?" He said.
Other hits like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, named after a Heinlein book, had crossover appeal, being covered by people like Judy Collins, Linda Ronstadt, and Charlie Hedden. Unfortunately, Webb's solo albums would never reach the acclaim of his songwriting, but he never stopped writing hits. One song of interest came in 1976-1977 in London while working on his sixth album, El Mirage, with Beatles producer, the fifth Beatle, George Martin. One night after work, Webb went drinking with his friend, fellow singer-songwriter, Harry Nilsson. When he fell asleep that night, Webb had one of the most vivid dreams of his life. He described it verbatim as, "I had an old brace of pistols in my belt, and I was riding hell-bent for leather down these country roads, with sweat pouring off my body. I was terrified because I was being pursued by police who were on the verge of shooting me. It was very real. I sat up in bed sweating through my pajamas." This dream would be Highwayman. Inspired, Webb got up out of bed and began work on the song at the piano immediately. By the end of the first verse, Webb realized the character dies, but the song was not over. Webb's Highwayman turned into eternal reincarnation. In a guitar-picking song, the Highwayman's identity shifts from bandit to sailor to dam builder to space traveler. It was a ballad that mixed American figures with reincarnation, linking that with the development of American civilization. When Webb played the song for Nilsson, though, the fellow songwriter took issue with the opening lines, "I was a highwayman, along the coach roads I did ride." Nilsson hated the phrase and corrected it as, "along the coach roads you rode?" Webb rejected the advice, though, and maintained the older turn of phrase. It was archaic on purpose. Webb felt it had a magnetism he could not explain. He would go on to dedicate 1977's El Mirage album to folk musician rambling Jack Elliott, author Kurt Vonnegut, and psychedelic psychologist Timothy Leary, after a discussion Webb had with the three in Toronto. All three were not non-negligible influences on the themes of the album. Unfortunately, or added last minute to the album, Highwayman languished as a song. Webb's own albums never reached the popularity of his hits he wrote for others, a common issue throughout his entire career. In retrospect, Webb admitted he was disappointed he let the song languish for so long after releasing the album. It would only have one cover in 1978, then a Norwegian version called Fridlos by Finn Kalvik in 1981. It would have to be a hit one day. Webb knew it. Glen Campbell, too. He featured the song as the centerpiece on his 1978 album, Highwayman, named in honor of the song. But it seemed like the song would take another life to reach fame. Due to multiple reasons, Campbell had to leave Capitol Records to get the album released. Management had little faith in the album for the 1980s musical environment. Unlike past collaborations, this song would not be a hit for Campbell. According to Webb, when the song eventually found its popularity, it was with the group it was predestined for. It finally happened in 1984 in Switzerland, of all places. Johnny Cash had been able to recruit Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Chris Christopherson for his TV Christmas special. All four had well-established working relationships, cross-appeal, and friendship combined with charisma, though Jennings and Christopherson occasionally clashed over the role of politics and music. The four forming a group was a natural decision. It was a combination more about personality, but the music was top-notch as well. In the mid-1980s, all three were coming off their first, or really for Cash, second, career heights. Nelson described them at the time as a group of loners. The later named Highwaymen would be a new level for all. The name came when Glen Campbell played Webb's Highwayman for Johnny Cash. Though, Campbell had actually played the song for Waylon Jennings first prior to Cash, but Jennings had not been interested at the time. The song's connection was only obvious with all four united. It was four voices across history and four figureheads of American country. Cash was, in fact, already a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame by that point. The combination was irresistible. It became the group's signature song, and it finally got its fame. The composition of the Highwaymen was as important as the composition of Webb's song. It was both old and new country branching out of progressive country. While a rebel early on, Johnny Cash's introspective man in black identity endeared him to older elements of country, and he was on better terms with the national establishment, depending on the day. Willie Nelson was the cosmic cowboy personified, having gained his early breakout fame from progressive country in Austin before going outlaw with Waylon Jennings. Jennings, who was well connected to both Cash and Nelson, was the iconic figurehead of the rule-breaking, drug-binging, outlaw country movement and the first to have a country album go platinum. Ironically, despite being connected through Jennings, Cash and Nelson barely knew each other before the group. Though often considered the odd man out of the four, Christopherson, the greenest of the four at the time, was admired by the entire group. All three had covers of several of his songs, and some had been hits, such as Sunday Morning Coming Down for Cash. Christopherson himself was a legitimate English scholar and a major voice in country. Despite their heaps of personality, or maybe because of it, the supergroup actually did not have a name at the start. They were simply credited on their first albums as Nelson, Jennings, Cash, Christopherson. They were one of the strongest musical supergroups ever assembled. Nelson has said the 1980s were the only time they could have formed, but it was the perfect time. Highwayman became their anthem because all four almost spent their lives on the road. It would be the first song of their 1984 album of the same name. The renown they gave Webb's song is what made them the Highwaymen. So what makes the song so iconic for Webb, Campbell, and the Highwaymen? It is all in the song. Fundamentally, none of the three versions differ much from Webb's original 1977 guitar picking cut. As the song shifts between four personalities, the song's soundscape changes with it, a trait maintained by all versions. Campbell's 1978 version chooses to emphasize the musical embellishments supporting the guitar, Webb later referring to Campbell as one of the best guitar players he ever heard. On the opposite end, the Highwaymen version of Highwayman chooses to de-emphasize the song down to mostly strings/guitar and vocals. It focuses on the association of Nelson, Christopherson, Jennings, and Cash's voices with their roles in the songs throughout their careers. Webb remarked on the substance of the song as one soul moving throughout history. It implies reincarnation, but the song can also be read as symbolic, a la The Hero with a Thousand Faces or Jungian psychology. It is ultimately a ballad of civilization itself, as Webb wrote in the liner notes for El Mirage. It has for me a lot of symbolism. It's about the kind of people who built this country up. The first verse is the rogue, the outlaw nation, the highwayman nation. The second verse is the seafaring nation, the trading and the growth of a nation, and its subsequent generations adding to that. And then the dam builder is a generation of construction and science and technology. And the last verse is a spacefarer. He's gonna fly a starship. And so it's an American allegory. It's everyman, in a way. The Highwaymen recording uses four iconic personalities of country to tell that one universal story. Willie Nelson, the cosmic cowboy, opens the song as the Highwayman, or Wild West Bandit. As Webb well noted, this Highwayman is a realist cowboy of the frontier, a rogue who marauds the coach roads along which he did ride. The ultimate symbol of anti-civilization who makes his living off it, as he does his work with sword and pistol by his side, both products of the civilized society he robs, but is ended by it as the bastards, civil authorities, hang him in the spring of 25, a connection to the Old West legends. Nelson's scraggly voice and outlaw reputation during the 1970s and 1980s support him here as the Highwayman. The Western sound reinforces this is of the frontier. Chris Christopherson follows that as a sailor sailing a schooner round the Horn to Mexico. The sailor, like the Highwayman, is still of the frontier if one considers the old rigging ships and see a frontier of their own, a commercial frontier at the fringes of society. Yet, it is again technology that ends this incarnation of the soul. The yards, ropes, on the mainsail of the schooner break off in the storm as the sailor climbs them. He dies anonymous on the sea. Christopherson's voice gives the sailor's personality a tone of too young wisdom. The subdued accompaniment becomes more complex. The flutes, chimes, and xylophone lend this verse an aquatic, mythical tone. Here the role of the soul has been subsumed by the increep of commercial, civilized society, but it still finds a vanguard place on the untamed frontier of the ocean. Waylon Jennings then takes up the role of the dam builder. This dam builder is as rough and tumble as the last two, but now builds in boulder, as he says, across the wild Colorado. Webb has directly credited the Hoover Dam as an inspiration for the song, and the mythological symbol of the river is rich in meaning here. Here, the increep of civilization is complete though. The dam builder, unlike his predecessors, is simply a paid laborer, but he still does his work on a pseudo-frontier. He inhabits the role of the structural frontier of civilization. As the physical frontiers of the Highwayman and sailor are gone, the dam builder works with the megastructures of technical skill, the technical frontier of civilization at its physical height. The dam builder, though, dies again another anonymous, sudden death, indirectly due to this technology he makes his living by. The dam builder relates as he slipped and fell into the wet concrete below, where he was buried in that great tomb that knows no sound. Jennings' personality is verbose and bold enough for this role. The backing track here focuses on percussion and the rush of water in the scenario. Civilization seems to close in around both the singer and the listener. The final verse, performed by Johnny Cash, breaks the binds of the first three. The spacefarer, or astronaut, embarks on the literal final frontier, some obvious influence from the 1960s space race. Cash's prophetic voice tells he flies across the universe divide to reach the other side, literally spanning the length of the universe in his journey. If one takes it as a purely American metaphor, this final frontier of the spacefarer harkens all the way back to the origins of America through the Highwayman, a role he contemplates as, I may become a highwayman again. The spacefarer uses the technology of civilization to find the new frontier the soul longs for. As the final role of the song, the spacefarer, or the soul in him, has grown old and weary through the cycle. The roar in the background emphasizes the overcoming of space by technology, but the ethereal strings show a weary hopefulness in it, the twinkle shared by the very young and very old. The conflict of anti-civilization and civilization has hardened. Cash's vocals give the song its prophetic conclusion that it will come again and again and again. Webb himself described Johnny Cash singing the last verse as like having the voice of God singing it. As Webb described it, the song builds through each verse as a metaphor for civilization, though not as a metaphor for history itself. The soul, or its personality, or its role, or form, whatever it may be, will always be around. The soul moves with the civilization, but it is always a product of it. The soul of the Highwayman, in all its incarnations, is never morally good. All the incarnations are fringe masculine roles, generally filled by outsiders. Highwayman/bandit, sailor, dam builder/construction worker, and astronaut/spacefarer. These jobs, though, build up the legend of civilization. Always the figure who rides ahead and civilization follows. History is established afterwards. The figure is always drawn ever closer to the center of civilization as it attempts to escape. The roles move from the romantic anti-civilization of the Highwayman at the start to the romantic hero of civilization in the spacefarer at the end, though the song does imply all four are heroic and villainous in equal measure. The mythology of the frontier is more than symbolic in the song. American history, as in the history of the United States, finds its core in Frederick Jackson Turner's frontier thesis, the thesis that it was the Western frontier that makes the United States unique. American civilization developed in a certain way due to exposure to the Western frontier. Turner's frontier thesis is the controversial core of American history. Many historians have attempted to support, deny, disprove, or subvert Turner's assertions in some form. It is still one of the earliest recognitions of unique United States civilization, though. Country Western music is inherently linked to that American frontier, or West, in the form of the social and musical crucible that created it. Turner referred to the closure of the frontier as the end of the first period of American history. Highwayman then follows past that frontier period of the Highwayman into the next 3 periods of American history, stretching away into the future. But all 3 symbolically resemble the first. Special attention should be paid to Cash's role at the end of this cycle. There is an obvious equivocation of astronaut/spacefarer as a cowboy, a common trope in the 1960s and 1970s. In song, the final verse is the imagined frontier. It highlights crossing across both time and space. This creates a textual clash through the cosmic, spiritual subject matter of space and the mythological, religious tone of Cash's voice and known personality. Interesting because according to Johnny Cash's daughter, Roseanne Cash, he was not aware the song was actually about reincarnation until she told him. It surprised the rather religious Johnny Cash. The spacefarer is like every pioneer before him, but he may also reset the cycle here. The spacefarer uses the technology of civilization to escape and move beyond the civilization he has known. The thematic importance of the line, "Perhaps I may become a highwayman again," weighs heavy here. While modern society sees the astronaut as an upstanding figure, the spacefarer's place alongside the highwayman, sailor, and dam builder implies something different here. The futuristic setting may mislead that this starship flyer is an impressive figure. Perhaps he is as ordinary as a highwayman, sailor, and dam builder as they were in their time, but just as romanticized. His openness to becoming a highwayman again suggests he, like humanity, could be just as morally gray as his forebears. Yet, he still blazes new paths across the universe divide. The place to where this starship sailor is going is yet another frontier. He may not choose to become a highwayman again, but this place will give him the freedom to do so. Only time will tell, but the listener is never told. While the spacefarer's part falls away before a conclusion, it must be remembered it is always crossing which does in the main figure of the song. The highwayman crosses the law and dies, the sailor crosses the ropes and dies, then the dam builder crosses the dam itself and dies. The final crossing is that of the universe itself. This ultimate cycle of building up and falling down perpetuates itself unto the stars. It is a natural cycle, so it has a beginning and an end, but they link into each other. Ultimately, like all good concepts, the cosmic cowboy holds its philosophical other inside itself. It can give birth to its absolute inversion. In Highwayman, through lyrics and sound, the Zen cowboy of the Eastern cyclical universe becomes a physical, arbitrary, but predestined remarkable figure of American mythology. These 2 cycles endlessly replicate each other in the song. The brutality of the highwayman will give birth to the sailor's commercial cynicism, which creates the hard reality of the dam builder's technology, which gives the infinite universe to the spacefarer. An anxiety against the ever-encroaching space, which humans desire to fill with sound, stories, and religion. Just as a single drop of rain, these characters will never be more than historical footnotes, but they will come again and again and again, forever. Rain comes again and again, as do figures and times. Sometimes they resemble each other. There will always come a journey for them to undertake, the crossing across law, society, technology, and physics. Webb's recognition of highwayman, seafaring, technological, and spacefaring civilizations is the realization of a civilization's own journey, the eternal categories of symbols, perhaps washed with a bit of musical innocence, but there is sincerity in it. This is necessary for a good country song. The road is the ultimate symbol of this American or United States civilization. The highwayman rides upon it. Country music, in the context of the United States, then, is inherently linked to the complexities, fractures, and complexes of the American situation. That may be why it is so confrontational in style. Where there are no roads, they are built. The union of the Highwaymen and Jimmy Webb's career are a sort of testament to that. for their time. Even long after Highwayman, on his 2010 album Just Across the River, Jimmy Webb not only reunited with Glen Campbell and Willie Nelson, but also performed a new version of Highwayman with legendary Dire Straits guitarist Mark Knopfler. While not as complex in personality as the Highwayman version, Webb and Knopfler do trade off vocals for each verse. It's much more a redux of Webb's version of the song. But in this modern redux, Knopfler and Webb conclude the retelling with, "Across the universe divide, and when I reach the other side, I'll find a place to rest my spirit if I can. Perhaps I may become a songwriter again. Or I may simply be a single drop of rain, but something will remain." Webb has said this on his hit Wichita Lineman, but it can also be applied to Highwaymen. "I just tried to take an ordinary guy and open him up and say, look, there's this great soul, and there's this great aching, and this great loneliness inside this person, and we're all like that. We all have this capacity for these huge feelings. Great soul, great aching, great loneliness, and great desire for the universe. Ride on, Cosmic Cowboy."
I'll fly a starship across the universe divide, and when I reach the other side, I'll find a place to rest my spirit if I can.
Again and again and again, I'd like to give a thanks to my supporter, the Gel Samini family.